Thank you, Monica. You're very kind. I made sure I wore a black suit so you know which side of the fence I'm on, just in case there was any doubt. Thank you, Susan. I love you. Those of us that have been involved in service for a while or have been in the fellowship for a while, sometimes you get very particular about the way we show respect to this fellowship, which is the way that some of us have continued to stay alive. I suffer from a very serious disease that's trying to kill me on a daily basis. And I love Narcotics Anonymous. And for that reason, when I'm asked to participate, I generally say that I will and try to do the best that I can. If you're hoping to hear someone that has all the answers, then you've got the wrong guy. But I can give you my experience with the 12 steps. They call this a 12-step fellowship, and that's what it's really about. I want to thank the committee for asking me to come here and to share about the thing that I love most, and that's recovery and Narcotics Anonymous. I want to thank Patty, the H&I chair, for sending a taxi for me. It was very kind. Something always seems to happen in my experience when I'm asked to share. Inevitably, something happens just before, other than I have to go to the men's room a lot. I met an addict tonight, just before this meeting, that I've known about, that I've spoken to on the telephone, and I met him for the first time tonight. And that's one of the miracles that we have here, is that we have relationships with people that we've never even met. But the love that we have from one addict to another goes very, very deep. That's why when anybody shares at a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous or from the podium, it's very easy to look around and see everybody shaking their head because we all have the same disease. I got the message of recovery in Narcotics Anonymous in my 17th treatment center. I got clean after my 21st treatment center. So I'm not the guy that walked in the room and said, "Thank God I'm home." Sure as hell didn't look like a place I wanted to stay. But after that 21st visit, October 14th, 1984, I got my first day clean October 15th. And I'm grateful to be clean since. So thank you. And although I do suffer from a lot of grandiosity, the reason I mention that because as I talk about some of my experiences until today, certainly some of you will wonder how the hell I ever stayed here. My first introduction to chemicals, I was about 7 years old. And I walked around a party at my parents' house and kept taking sips out of glasses, and it made me feel good. I put that together with the fact that my father was a police officer, and when I was 10 years old, he put me in jail for coming home with a bicycle that didn't belong to me. So I guess my introduction to H&I from the inside was at a very early age. But you know how we are as addicts, that we take anything to the maximum. And from that early experience, the outside of me never showed any remorse, any feelings, any sign that I was troubled. But on the inside, I was hurting. And I remember when I first started to stay clean, the things that I would think about most often was how my whole life I just wanted to be loved. I wanted to be understood. I wanted people to like me. And I did a lot of things to achieve those ends, but never seemed like I ever arrived. When I got to Narcotics Anonymous, and I heard that earlier today, people loved me much more before I even understood what the hell was going on. Because how could I? How could I ever think that the things that I had done would be acceptable to anybody in society? But Narcotics Anonymous is one of those kind of places where we understand. and we nurture each other, and we reach out our hand to the newcomer. Because just remember how it was when you were brand new. So when we start being a little picky, or so it seems, about language or the way that we treat the readings in our fellowship, just remember what the newcomer must be thinking sitting there. Of course, when I was new, if I ever came to a convention like this and they were asking who had one day clean, I sure the hell wouldn't stand up. Some hotels know about conventions and they take the cloth napkins away from you because they used to bombard the newcomers with them when they walked up. So they don't do that anymore. And most hotels that know about Narcotics Anonymous don't give us free coffee anymore. In 1971, I became a Macedonian. And that doesn't mean I got a job writing scripture for the Gideon's Bible. Quite the contrary. I found that miracle cure for my disease in a wafer that they crushed up in a cup and put Tang juice on. And to this day, I don't drink Tang juice. But I found myself at the end of the road, as it says in our literature, when at the end of the road we can no longer go on with or without drugs. There must be another way. And today we have Narcotics Anonymous. I found myself at the end of my road on 120 milligrams of that miracle cure, and it wasn't working anymore. And anything that I added to it did not enhance it like it once did. And I found myself somewhat in a desperation. I found myself starting to make the tour of treatment places. And it's true, I've been in 21 different treatment type programs. And I got clean in the state of Connecticut. And back in the state of Connecticut in the early 70s, they had such programs as Project Fire, Daytop, Dartec. I was in the Department of Mental Health halfway house one time, and if you didn't use drugs for 30 days, you got drinking privileges. I stayed there for 13 months. I've been in all those treatment centers that some of you remember where you kind of shuffle around on a lot of Thorazine. They give you paper slippers and paper bathrobes, and they usually have you put them on backwards. So there's a draft in the back. Didn't make any difference to me. And the last 5 times I was in treatment was in a psychiatric ward, and I just couldn't seem to get it. I would stay 5 days in detox, and they would let me go at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 11 I'd be at the connections house getting my reward for being abstinent for 5 days, and I'd be back on another run. But in 1983, one of those times that a loving God tries to reach out to us, I found myself in the state of New Hampshire in a treatment center that had a fantastic brochure. They had an indoor pool, sauna bath, looked like Bally's. It was one of those real nice places that, of course, I thought that I belonged in. And on a Saturday afternoon, a man named John and a lady named Camille came into that facility, and they talked about recovery in a fellowship called Narcotics Anonymous. And when they started talking about their experiences, I thought for sure they had gone into the office and read my jacket, because everything they talked about was me, that identification that we feel when someone starts talking about their life and how it parallels ours in so many ways. John and Camille are no longer with us, but I'm very, very glad that they died with this disease and not from it. They both had over 10 years clean when John had a heart attack and passed away, and Camille died of cancer. But those were the people that came and planted that seed that really spoiled my using for the next 9 months. In the next 9 months, I was in detox 5 times. And I found myself in that last detox, like many of us do, really wanting to stop using and not knowing how. And on the 5th day before they let me out of that facility, this person came in to see me from an H&I committee. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't want to use." He said, "You don't have to." I never heard that ever in my life, that I did not have to use. And I remember telling him I didn't know how to do that. And he gave me a piece of paper and he said, "Go to these addresses and you'll meet people just like us." And he gave me a piece of paper, and at that time in the state of Connecticut, there was about 7 meetings. Each night it was in a different city. Now, granted, the state of Connecticut is a little bit smaller than LA County, but it was still somewhat of a drive to go to meetings. So I remember that very first night that I left detox, and I looked at the piece of paper. I didn't go to the connection, and I drove past this church at 10 minutes to 8, and there was no lights on. And my disease told me that they're lying to me. There's nothing going on here. And I went up the street and I turned around and came back by, and there was lights on. And I had a lot of trust back then. So I parked about 2 blocks away around the corner, made sure there was no street lights so anybody could see my car. And I walked into the meeting about 5 minutes late, and they were talking about recovery and Narcotics Anonymous. And I sat down and listened. And at the end, they said, "We're going to close this meeting with a prayer." And I said, just like someone said earlier today, I know it. This is a religious movement. They're going to have me at the airport with a tambourine. That's not what I had in mind, you know. And so I split. But something on the way walking to my car touched me because I started to cry. I started to cry like I had never cried before. And I know today the reason was that I saw something that people had and I didn't think I could get it. I felt totally insecure, unworthy, inadequate, all those feelings that we have when we're new. But the next night I looked on a piece of paper. I went to another meeting. I parked 2 blocks away in the dark, went in 5 minutes late, left 5 minutes earlier. I started a pattern, and I was kicking 120 milligrams of methadone, and I was sick. And I'd go to work every day, and I'd look forward to going to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at night. I was a purist from the very beginning because I had tried other fellowships, I had tried churches, I had tried psychiatry, and I certainly tried treatment centers, and nothing ever worked. But I was starting to get a passion very early that I couldn't wait until 8 o'clock when the meeting started. When I started meetings after that, I'd start them at 6 o'clock. So other people that felt like I felt wouldn't have to wait till 8 o'clock. But I remember going to meetings, and one day someone would said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, my name is Chuck, and I'm just visiting." I probably had about 6 or 7 weeks, and you know how we are. All of a sudden, we get that fire inside of us, and they were talking on a topic that I thought I had a lot to share about. So I raised my hand, and I said I was an addict. My name was Bob, and I shared. Well, God, when I was done, they said, "Keep coming back." I figured they liked what I had to say. I haven't shut up since. Thank you. I had about 6 months clean, and this guy, John, had given me the message, said to me at a meeting, "We're going to go to maximum security prison Wednesday night." He was the kind of person never really asked. He kind of told you what you're going to do. I said, "I'm not going there." And he said, "No, it's cool. Let's go." And I really didn't want to go because I had some bad experiences for 27 months there. But I went. I went on my first H&I presentation, and I couldn't believe how I felt walking out after, which was the first miracle. Nor could I understand why I wanted to do it again. But I guess I got bit by that thing that we get when we get a personal satisfaction out of carrying the message of recovery. I'm certain that seeing some people I did time with still there, clean, inside a prison, did something that touched my heart. And it continues to touch my heart to go into institutions and seeing people have that unbelievable passion for recovery. I just wish they could continue the day they leave. Because if you have the experiences that I have, not a whole lot of people from inside the institutions get to the street and stay clean. The nature of our disease is that we have a reward coming for the time that we do. But I think that the message, if it's appropriate for the people that do H&I work and get a chance to talk to the institutions, is to encourage them to have a meeting room for Narcotics Anonymous on a daily basis. Because if we tell those inmates to go to a meeting every day, when they get out, what about when they're in? And what about long-term facilities? So I would encourage, if you do H&I work, to ask the facility to provide a room for meetings of Narcotics Anonymous on a daily basis. I've seen it in other institutions and it works fantastic. And there is a greater success rate that addicts may find us when they leave. When I got a year clean, I was given a key tag that they told me glowed in the dark. So I had to go in the bathroom and turn the light off. I mean, I had to. I couldn't wait to. And that sucker glowed in the dark, and it was cool. I used to put my keys on the dresser at home, and in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and I'd see it glowing, and I'd say, that's cool. Mm-hmm. But as all addicts with a year or two clean, I knew everything. And when they said, now the work begins, I certainly understood service work. So I became a service person my second year. The only thing I knew about 12 steps is that we read them at every meeting. In order for me to feel somewhat empowered by them, I made a step meeting my home group so I could be arrogant in telling everybody that. But I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't have a man that I asked to help me. The guy that gave me the list of meetings, he told me he would sponsor me, and I said, great. He went to another place. I never had to see him, so that was fine with me. And when I did see him, if I was still clean, then everything was great. I thought that recovery meant that you go to meetings every day. I had no idea that it meant you had to change. But staying here a while, I know today that if addicts don't change, their clean date will. Time and time again. That scares me. So in order not to be afraid of those kinds of things, I continue to go to meetings as many nights as I can. I continue to sponsor people. I continue to go on panels. I had the privilege of going to the Los Angeles County Jail last week. I got there late. I apologized. And I told them I know you guys weren't going anywhere anyways. I think, it does the heart good to mix a presentation of any kind with a little bit of humor. Because sometimes I don't feel wrapped all that tight anyway. My sponsor would agree. But when I started coming up on 2 years clean, I wanted to die. And I knew there was something the matter with that. Being clean for 2 years and still wanting to die, and I know I'm not alone in those feelings, to me there was something wrong with that, and I didn't know what it was. And I met this barely 5-foot person that changed my life. And I have no qualms about mentioning that this little lady, did for me what I couldn't do for myself. She told me to get honest. I had no idea what she was talking about because I thought that I was honest. My best thinking got me here. I thought that I was honest. But then she came to California. We were living in Connecticut. She went to California to see her sponsor and to develop a plot. I know that today. And if you know my sponsor and her sponsor, you know it was a good plot. And she came back from California with a cassette tape. And I listened to this man speak, and the tears came out of my eyes once again, because he had that special something that I wanted. And we all know when we hear that message from that person that we want to be like, that we want to have that kind of recovery. And he talked about the 12 steps. And a loving God put that man in my living room about 2 weeks later. And I watched him and I listened to him. And you know how it is when you finally get the nerve or the courage to ask someone to help you and the words stick in your throat and you kind of like shuffle around a little bit. And I said, I was wondering if maybe you'd sponsor me. And he told me it would be a privilege. And what I've learned in Narcotics Anonymous is the things that we do is a privilege. Honors mean we get something. Privileges mean we do something. So to me, it's a privilege to sponsor another man when they ask me to. So he said to me, where you at with the steps? So I started telling him all I knew. He told me to shut up. And he said, I want you to write down what the first step means to you. So the first time I wrote for my sponsor, I was very careful on penmanship. I wanted instant gratification and approval. Stayed up half the night writing what step one meant to me. And the next morning when I saw him, I handed it to him. He said, what you want me to do with this? I said, you told me to write this. He said, you wrote it, you read it. I found out that I don't work the steps so my sponsor will get better or give me approval. The steps are for me to get better. And it's not just about writing them, it's about internalizing them. It's not a course, it's not a class. It's an ongoing internalization of spiritual principles that make my life better when I choose to apply them. And when I wrote about step one, and I wrote about what it meant to admit that I'm powerless, I realized everything I do after admittance is to try to control and manipulate the outcome, the justification, the rationalization, the denial that I put into my daily life so I don't have to feel powerless. And it's all that makes my life unmanageable. And I feel very stuck. See, what I know about addicts today, and I liken it to a swan on a lake, and they glide along so smooth. But if you look under the water, they're paddling their ass off. And that's what we do. We continually try behind the scenes to keep ourselves afloat and looking good. I mean, I think most of us can agree that looking good is everything, you know. And what I found out that working the steps takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of internalization. And to me today, it's like breathing because I can't work a step unless I work the steps previously. So the answer to me became obvious that if I was going to admit that I was powerless, I needed to act powerless by coming to believe in a power greater than myself. Very, very difficult for me because I was raised in an organized religion that told me that God was going to get me. And how could I come to believe in something that was going to get me? On the positive side, I at least found a power greater than myself that wasn't a doorknob or an electric light bulb, like I heard some people talk about. Because how the hell could I take a third step and turn my will and life over to a doorknob? That just didn't fly for me. But I learned about this power that was greater than myself, that was loving and caring in step two. I found out that the most important thing to all of us is our understanding of a higher power. Because you don't have to believe in the one that I have, and I don't have to believe in the one that you have as long as it works for you. Up until last year, I was a member of World Services for about 7 years, and I'm a member of the pool. One of the things that troubled me during those years of service was the years that the conversation would develop about taking God out of the literature. I got to tell you, God is the glue that holds this whole thing together. Don't let him do it. You make sure that your area representatives and regional delegates keep together what we have found works for addicts today. And I'm not trying to get trippy on the three letters GOD. I'm just saying we can't please everybody, so don't mess with it. It bothers me. I'll try not to get on any more causes tonight. Because in the third step, we make that decision to turn our will and life over. It doesn't mean that really works for any of us. For me, I get on my knees every morning and I ask God to help me. And depending on how bad I need to go to the bathroom, depends how long I stay on my knees. But as I walk to the bathroom, many times I start thinking how I can help because of all the newcomers that God has to deal with. So maybe I can do something to help. And that's when my day starts going south a little bit. What became obvious to me, however, in that process And I remember like it was yesterday. When I first got clean, I thought about using every minute of every day. But I remember the morning that I woke up, and as I walked to the bathroom, the thought occurred to me that I didn't think about using this morning. Matter of fact, I didn't think about using yesterday morning. And to me, that was a power greater than myself. That's how it occurred to me. And I've never forgot that. I can't say enough how the steps need to be an everyday occurrence in my life. And I think that's what all of us need to do to start getting a sense of recovery. Because it's very, very difficult on a daily basis to deal with living life on life's terms. Things happen to all of us. You know, people die, people go back out and use, relationships get broken, but that's living life, and I really, really must say that the people that have been clean longer than me are my heroes. I am so grateful when I go to a meeting and I see people with more clean time than me, which in Southern California is just about every meeting, that these people put something in place that so that I would have a place to come to when I got the message. So I thank the Martins and the Susans, that have come before me to give me what I have today. Seeing my sponsor speak at the World Convention was one of my joys in recovery. My having the capacity to go down to Brazil a couple of weeks ago and speak at their convention was just so awesome, I can't describe it. If you want to see a passion for recovery, go on vacation to Brazil, and you'll see a fellowship that is strong, over 500 meetings well into the Amazon. And these people don't make a lot of money, but they contribute to world services. They support their service structure. $1 does not go as far as it used to 25 years ago or 20 years ago. And I encourage addicts everywhere to support this fellowship. There's a lot of things that need to be done to enjoy what we have here in North America. And we need to support our brothers and sisters trying to recover in other parts of the world. And that's why they have world services and support that. When, when my sponsor said, I think it's time for you to do an inventory, I told him how the 21 treatments I was in, I had to write about myself. And what did he want me to write in this inventory? And he said, why don't you tell the truth for a change? How do sponsors know those things? So I wrote an inventory, much longer than I ever anticipated when I began. And I tried to talk about all those things that I thought I would take to the grave. They're not all that important anymore. They kind of lost their power when I sat and did a fifth step with my sponsor. Those of you that have had trouble writing inventories, let me just share a little bit about why I brought up Brazil. This person in Brazil asked me to sponsor him 2 years ago by mail. He doesn't speak English and I don't speak Portuguese, but he has a sponsee that's bilingual and would be the intermediary in translating the letters that he would send me. When I was down there, he had his fourth step written, and we got together in the hotel room to do a fifth step. And as we knelt and I asked God to join us so that this person could be, honest and sharing and admitting to God himself and another human being the exact nature of his wrongs, this person looked up at me and held up two fingers. And I asked the translator what he said. He said, he's admitting to God himself and two other human beings. I got to tell you, that was one of the greatest experiences in my recovery, to hear an inventory translated. When I finished my fifth step, my sponsor said, I want you to make a list of defects of character. Now, the sixth step talks about becoming entirely ready to have God remove all these defects. And I know some addicts think that if they do a real good sixth step, that those defects are going to go away and never come back. Lately, my analogy is like defects come to the forefront, and when you deal with them, they go to the back of the line to come back again someday. Or another analogy is like taking, removing your shoes and put them in the corner. but every now and then you want those comfortable shoes back, so you put them back on. Because we know which defects for us are comfortable. And I know for myself, when I started writing the definition of those words, I used to have a nervous habit or a knee-jerk response. When my sponsor would tell me things, I would answer, I know. Until one day he said, why don't you write how come you know every goddamn thing? I found out how little I really knew when I started writing the definition of these defects. And then I wrote how they affected my life and how my life would be without them. And I started to understand that my whole life, all I ever did was replace a defect with a different defect. You know, when I got arrogant, I got self-righteous. If I started getting mistrusting of somebody, I would start being critical of them. Someone had a nice car, I would call them names because of the jealousy that I had. So I started to understand that. So when my sponsor said, I want you to work step 7, humbly ask God to remove your shortcomings, he told me, I want you to get on your knees and look at your defect and ask God to help you the way you act out on these defects. And I did that day after day after day. And I remember telling my sponsor, I don't feel anything. He said, what did you write about? I said, well, I haven't written anything. He said, what do you expect? My expectations are usually fairly great. So I started writing the spiritual principles that I needed to apply instead of replacing a defect with another defect. And I started to feel the freedom. I started feeling the humility that's necessary to accept people where they're at, not where I think they should be. I started accepting other people's defects. I started talking bad about people a little less. Not entirely, a little less. During the process of working the steps, I had an idea that there would come a time when I would start feeling forgiveness. And I hadn't really felt that. And when my sponsor said, you need to write an 8-step list of people you have harmed and the exact nature of the wrong, is where I kind of like stopped in my process. And I remember my sponsor telling me or asking me, if your recovery depended on you making an 8-step list, would you do it? I said, absolutely. He said, your recovery depends on you making an 8-step list. And I realized the reason that I had a hard time with that was because I was still a victim. And as long as I remained the victim, I would not feel that freedom. That I had to get out of the way and understand that most everybody in my life I had harmed financially, emotionally, and sometimes physically. And it was a very, very painful experience because as an addict, I think I got something coming. People owe me. What about me? You know, what's mine? But when I started getting out of that mindset and I started looking at situations in reality and got out of the fantasy, it started to make sense and it started to work for me. And I wrote for a long time on step 8, and there was a couple of pages of family members and running partners that were deceased. And it bothered me immensely. And I remember asking my sponsor what I could ever do about the people on these pages that were no longer with us. And he said something to me that was so simple, but I've never forgot the moment he said it. And what he told me is you help newcomers so they don't have to die. And I never forgot that. So when I look in the eyes of a newcomer, I introduce myself, I remember that this is to make amends to those people I'll never see again. And I've had to make some of those, heart-wrenching trips to the cemetery to see the graves of loved ones, not only to make that visit, but to, in my heart, pour out how much love I really had for them. And that I'm sorry that I wasn't the grandson or whatever it was that they really wanted me to be. And then I started making some direct amends. And I remember going to my parents' house and I asked them to put a dollar figure on the damage I had done. And my father said, you'll never live long enough. And my mother started crying. You know how mothers are. And she said, we don't want any money. I thought I was home free. Sounded really good at the time. So I said to my sponsor, they don't want any money. He said, and you feel good about that? And I stopped and I thought, he said, you make amends so you can live with yourself. You don't do it, in a people pleasing move so that you can try to, do a lightweight change of heart for them. So it was the summertime, and I remember going out and getting my parents a VCR because they never had one. If they did, it never would have lasted very long. And I bought them a VCR, and my mother and was just like thrilled. And when I go back to Connecticut today, she still points at it and says, I'm still using it. And that does my heart good that I have a relationship with my parents today. Even my father, who locked me up when I was 10 years old, can look at each other, and feel the affection that a father and son should have. Probably 90%. Because there's still that little piece that I feel he has not forgotten. He's forgiven, but he hasn't forgotten. Because every now and then my father will say to me, are you really still clean? It's hard for him to believe. I went to my sponsor and I said, I'd like to make amends to my brother. My brother is a year older than me. I know when his birthday is. I know his social security number. And he got arrested a lot. And I felt very bad about that. So my sponsor said, do you love your brother? And I said, yes. He said, go tell him. It sounded real easy until I looked my brother in the eye and the words got caught in my throat. And I went into the bathroom and I said, God, please help me do this. It's necessary. I have to do this for my recovery. And as nervous and shaky as I was, I walked out and I looked at my brother and I said, I love you. He said, yeah, I know. And I thought he forgave me. A couple of years ago, my brother came through California on a business trip and we went out to dinner. And at the end of dinner, he said to me, I finally forgive you. So loving God gave me 6 or 7 years where I thought I was forgiven. I was able to live within myself. I was able to go to my brother's house upon invitation. He still hasn't told me where the key is to get in, but he invites me, and it's a miracle. My sister has a little bit different sense of humor because when I went to my sister's house and I said, when you got married and went on your honeymoon and I took your Electrolux and went out the back door, I'd like to buy you a vacuum cleaner. She says, I don't need one, but I'd like you to come and vacuum my house every Saturday. Not what I had in mind. 6 years ago, I went back east to be in a wedding 7 years ago. And when I got to my mother's house, she gave me this letter and she said, gee, I'm glad you're here. This letter just came for you this week. And I opened this letter and it was a picture of a young lady and the letter said, you don't know me, but you're my father. And I met my daughter for the first time when she was 19 years old. And in a couple of weeks, she's going to give birth to a baby boy. That's going to be my first grandson. And I say this because none of this would have been possible if I wasn't clean. If I wasn't clean, she never would have found me. And if I wasn't clean, I never would have contacted her because it would have been just one more. And I went in front of a judge and got the case thrown out of court. And in my grandiosity, I wanted to start thanking the court and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And my lawyer grabbed my coat and said, get the hell out of here. Mm-hmm. Another case of how my mouth overloads my ass more often than not. When I started working step 10, it was the kind of feeling I had was, oh, step 10 is about, at the end of the day, writing everything that I do wrong. It's not like that anymore. Step 10 is part of my daily routine of continuing to take my personal inventory. And the reason I do that is because my wife told me everybody else takes it. So you might as well take your own. So what I do in step 10 today is I just look at the reality of my life. And I share the good things with my sponsor and my sponsees and people in my life. And I share the bad things. Because I know that whatever is negative in my life, dies in the light. I'm only as sick as my secrets. When I start feeling a secret coming on today, I go talk to my sponsor. It's necessary. I have to. Because in step 11, what a step that was when I first looked at it. I thought I had to go back to the Bangladesh concert album or something, and magic carpet rides and all this stuff. Burn incense, for God's sake. Prayer and meditation, or as some addicts say, prayer and medication. But I had to be able to get in touch with my higher power to find out what God's will was for me. So I know what God's will is not, but I don't know what God's will is. But through prayer and meditation, which is talking and listening to my higher power, I might be able to get an idea. But most importantly, in step 11 is the courage to carry it out. We as addicts know when we get to that fork if we should go left or right. It's just so hard to make the right decision sometimes. Step 12 has all the rewards that the 12 steps should have. Because I listen to people with 30 days, and they talk about spiritual awakenings. And I tell them, don't drink so much coffee. Because a spiritual awakening for me really comes from a result of working the 12 steps. Because the spiritual awakening really is a new direction in our lives that we get from the incorporation of those kinds of spiritual principles. So when we get that new direction in life, we try to carry that message. Instead of the mess, we try to carry the message to other addicts. The most difficult thing, and I think the part of step 12 that is so easily overlooked, is practicing these principles in all our affairs. And I say that because I sponsor some beautiful guys that are so spiritual, and they're married to non-addicts. And these people say, gee, you go to the NA meetings and you hug each other and you tell each other you love each other, and you come home and you're an asshole. And that's terrible for someone that's in recovery to act like a fool. These principles that we learn is a 24/7 thing. We have to learn how to treat people with love and respect, whether we like them or not. It's impossible for us to love everybody, but it is possible to respect. And how that pertains to this weekend and H&I and PI work is I'm very, very serious when it comes to carrying a message to men's prison by men and to women's places by women, that men sponsor men and women sponsor women. I guess I'm just old-fashioned, but I know that that's what works. I had the privilege in 1986 to become part of a committee on the East Coast that began writing the handbook for H&I. And I remember going to meetings in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia and New York and New Jersey and Baltimore. And we sat around and we talked about what works best for Narcotics Anonymous, not what works best for me. And we came up with a lot of the basis for what you see today in the H&I handbook. And to continue that privilege, I was a pool member of H&I for 4 years, a voting member of H&I for 2 years, a member of the board of directors. And I did those things, a lot of those things, because nobody really knew that I was doing them. People know when you're up in front and you're speaking and you're doing those kind of things, but what you do behind the walls and what you do in committee meetings is an endless journey of satisfaction for the addict that serves. I just have not made it my primary purpose to stay clean anymore. Today, my value is in the 12 steps, sponsorship. I believe sponsorship is the most important thing in Narcotics Anonymous. That once you put down the drugs, pick up a sponsor. Because if you don't, you're not going to stay here. And if you do stay here, you're not going to get all the freedom that's promised. That I know. That is my experience. That's what I've seen. Personal recovery depends on NA unity. Don't ever forget that the way we talk, the way we hug, the way we love each other is the most important thing that we can do for the newcomer that gets here. My sponsor once told me that what we do in service is not for self-satisfaction, it's for the addict who has yet to arrive. And I've never forgot that. Again, I want to thank the committee for asking me to come here tonight to do the thing that I love most, and that's share my experience of the 12 steps. I love Narcotics Anonymous. I love the new addicts I've just met tonight, and I hope to see you again. Thank you very much.